Interviews with business owners and veteran executives who share their wisdom and expertise to help you de-stress, free up time, and make more money. Profits of IT. Welcome back to the Profits of IT. I am Jim Punzenberger, your host, and the creator of the Managed Prospecting System, looking to generate clients or partners without cold calling, ad spend, or spamming. Be sure to check out managedprospectingsystem.com. Excited to have Brett with me today. Brett, why don't you please introduce yourself and tell us a quick bit about your company.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jim. My name is Brett Jaffe. I'm one of the founding partners of an organization called ConnectStrat. ConnectStrat's a group of business coaches and guides in the IT industry. So we work with companies on business growth, strategy, leadership development, sales training, kind of work across the whole range. My background is I came from the MSP space. So I was an MSP in Boston for just over 20 years. So if you can't tell from the hairline and the white, that's I'm 15. So that's how it ages you, right? I also worked on the vendor side of it. So I sold my MSP back in 2012, built a vendor channel for a company called OS33 at the time, left again in 2017 to build my coaching and consulting practice. And now we have about 15 coaches between the US, the UK, and now Australia.
Oh, that sounds like you guys are growing fast. So what's something interesting about yourself outside of work, Brett?
Oh, outside of work, I always give people, it's always fun to give those like little weird tidbits. So aside from, basic hobbies, like, yeah, I love to be the outdoors. I love to, ski and mountain bike and do the outdoor stuff. But I always ask people, like, what's something that no one knows about you? Like, well, when I was a teenager, I was in a really bad B movie with martial arts in it. So that was always a fun thing to share. I think it's probably still out there.
So were you like into martial arts?
I was an extra. Oh, it was the guy that ran the martial arts school at the time got into the whole professional wrestling circuit and kind of the dog and pony show, and they created this this B movie with there's some known actors in there. For anyone in martial arts, there was a Professor Toru Tanaka, who was the I forgot his name. In one of the James Bond movies, he was the big heavyset guy with the hat with the razor blade on it.
Okay, cool. So you appeared in one movie.
Those are my acting credits. So yeah. I get no royalties. And even if I did, it would probably amount to about $13.
So anyways, what would you say is your superpower when it comes to business, or what would you say are the keys to your success, and how can others learn from that and apply that in their own lives to be more successful?
Oh, it's an interesting question, because I've always looked at superpower as more of a business thing. Like, what's your business superpower? It's one thing to kind of advertise yourself from a marketing standpoint. I would say my superpower in business is having been beaten up so much that you're still able to get back up and fight. So part of being in business is learning that it's not all successes. You have a lot of failures along the way. And there's been so many times over the course of being in business where you just kind of want to give up. You want to give up and go work for somebody. You want to give up and sell. It's really easy to give up. It's really hard when you're down to live that entrepreneurial life where you're like, okay, what do I have to change? And so they say that that's kind of the secret to some of these larger companies, that if you notice when for a period of time, Steve Jobs stepped down from Apple, and let someone else run the company, and you lose that creative visionary type spirit of a company. And that's what drives companies forward, is instead of thinking, oh crap, we're not having a good month or a good year or a good quarter, and your instinct from an operational standpoint is to cut your expenses and do whatever you have to do. But the real entrepreneurs, the real visionaries, look at it as, okay, what do I have to change, to get back to where I need to be? And it's a slightly different mindset. So I would call that part of the superpowers. We're constantly looking at, reinventing, redeveloping, and really taking things with a much more progressive strategic point of view. So our superpower right now as a company, as Connectstrat, is helping other companies grow. So we know the formula that works for that process, and we're good at it. We have almost 100% success rate, with our clients that we work with. So that's been a lot of fun.
Cool. So if maybe say like you're struggling right now as an entrepreneur and need to get back up, so to speak, as you mentioned, do you have any tips on doing that? And how can I go from, I just maybe my business, I'm in down in a lull or valley of my business and trying to get back up on a peak. And have any tips for that?
Everything is, listen, you got to pick this point in the distance where you need to be. And so I think a lot of companies struggle because they're caught in the day to day. And sometimes your instinct is to do more of what you're currently doing. And when you get in this lull or this peak, you got to look at two things. Number one, why are you in business to begin with? Number two, what's really your long-term goal? Where do you want to be? Because you can't start to make that progress until you have a destination. So think about like going out for a run. If you're going to go run a marathon, you know where the finish line is, and you could plot every piece along the way, right? You know where you need to be at the 13-mile mark. You need to be, when you're toward the finish line. If you just go out for the sake of running, but you have no destination, that's exactly where you end up, in the middle of nowhere. So you have to start figuring out where is it that you want to be as an organization, and then you work backwards from there. And part of that is, strategy. If the business is going down, sometimes it's an indicator that whatever you're doing at the time is starting to lose track. Maybe it's not as relevant as it once was. So, part of it is, what can we reinvent ourselves with? There's a lot of what I call blue ocean in terms of strategy. What are some of the things that you're good at and no one really does well, but you see an opportunity there to kind of forge your way in that space? If you don't start kind of reinventing how your company operates, who you're going to target, have those set goals in mind, because then you can't do any planning. How do you know what's important to do next week if you don't know where you're going to be next quarter, if you're not making progress toward where you need to be at the end of the year? So everything is defined by very specific targets. And it all starts there. It starts with strategy and then works over to execution.
Cool. And so what else is important to know?
I'm sorry, I lost.
I said, what else is important to know about this?
What else is important to know? In terms of growth or in terms of execution?
I guess both, or either.
So, listen, growth is it's a result of executing properly. So business going out to just grow arbitrarily doesn't necessarily grow predictably. And I'm a huge fan of metrics and numbers. They're really good indicators of keeping yourself on track. But again, going back, it's not arbitrary. So if you let's say you're an IT organization and you're doing $1 million in sales, and your target is, I want to be doing $5 million in sales inside of 3 years. So, okay, great. We work back and say, what do we have to do, to get to the midpoint mark? What do you have to do at the end of this year? Ultimately, what do you have to do at the end of the quarter? And you might come out to a sales target, but now you start to look at, well, how do I hit that sales target without knowing the metrics? How many phone calls do I have to make? How many letters do I have to send? How many appointments do I need? What's my average appointment? Everything is numbers driven. And you have to be fanatical about a few things. You have to be fanatical about the people that work for you. You have to be fanatical about those numbers and those metrics and those goals. You have to be fanatical about the processes that you use, so they're repeatable and scalable. So when you do bring people on board, it's being done the same way. And all of these components lead to results. Otherwise, you don't get that. And yeah, I say this in a more generic term, but I mean, we're talking to mostly IT providers, right?
Yeah.
On this podcast. There is conservatively 150,000 IT companies. Why are you different? When you go to your client, why do they want to talk to you versus probably the other 20 people in your town, let alone, what else is happening? What makes you different? What makes you unique? You're another person there. How are you doing it differently? How are you establishing those relationships? What's your target? Because that's kind of the way you have to start thinking here is you're competing against a lot of companies, and the average IT company is 6 people and a little over $1 million in revenue. So how do you get past that? How do you become that unicorn that gets to 3, 5, 10, 20? And it happens, by the way, plenty of companies that I know started at 3 people and built to 50 plus million, so, and they don't do it. It's not a 30-year time frame either. So how do you do that? Is you do it intentfully. You don't just, I'm going to do more of what we're doing, because that doesn't work. It just get busier and more frustrated. And then you get in those lulls like you heard about, right? You kind of go with those valleys where you're struggling, a big client left, you're not getting the leads that you expected before. That's great, but don't leave yourself an out. What do you have to change? How do you get back to where you were? At least if you have that target, you know what you have to hit every quarter.
All right. So it really comes down to knowing your numbers.
It comes down to having a vision first of where you need to be. So I spent over 20 years in the Army, and there's a process we call back planning. And part of my job, I was a medical services corps. And we would get an assignment, for example, that we need a field hospital set up in a theater of operations by 1st of August. You don't have an option to not do that, right? This has to be set up. There's no, we have logistics going around this. So you have to know what has to happen a week before, a month before, 3 months before. If you have a problem, I'd rather know about the problem this week than a week before we're supposed to go live as part of that. That's the whole point of tracking your numbers and knowing what that goal is. If you don't have that goal, and you probably heard 1,000 people that said, write down your goals, you're more likely to achieve them. If you don't have that goal, how do you know what you're aiming for? How do you know what your numbers need to be this quarter or even this week? And when you're tracking stuff, you get pretty good at looking at them and seeing, are they trending up? Are they trending down? Is there something I need to address? Because I'd rather course correct now than a week before I'm supposed to hit my target. You have to treat business all the same way. You don't go out and train for a marathon a week before the marathon. You start saying, okay, I have a training plan. I'm going to start with doing a mile this week, and I'm going to add a half mile every week. I'm going to run 3 days, 2 fast days, 1 distance. You have this like really strategic plan. So by the time the marathon comes, it's routine. You've already done it.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just start, right before and say, I'm going to go run 26 miles. Although I think that's how the very first triathlon, you know the story about that? The very first Ironman triathlon was a bunch of guys in Hawaii that decided that they're going to create this crazy race. A marathon wasn't enough. No training. And they did a full Ironman around the island. That's how the distances were calculated.
Yeah.
It's a pretty interesting story.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds interesting. So basically the distance meant how big is the island that we're on, and that's going to be what the distance is. Cool. Any final thoughts?
No, that's it. I mean, this is everything has an operating system. Like your computer has an operating system, your phone has an operating system. A business has an operating system. There's a predictable way to run just about every business where you could have your predictable growth and revenue. And there's a reason why there are certain entrepreneurs that can start a business and be successful almost every time. Some of it, yeah, depending on what industry you're in, but I'm not talking about the unicorns like Amazon or Facebook. I'm talking about an average company. And if you ever read the book, Jim Collins, Good to Great, they analyze a lot of companies that are in pretty routine industries and looked at them over the course of a decade to say, what makes some of these companies so that they continue to grow and expand and the other ones don't? How do they become bigger in the same space as everybody else? What are they doing differently? And there's a lot that goes into that in terms of having the right people in the company, in terms of having the strategy, in terms of having what he calls the Hedgehog Concept, which is what is your superpower, as you phrased it earlier. That's really what it is. It's the superpower. What makes you unique and different? And when you go in with an intentional mindset of, I'm growing to grow a company, I'm going to be this size, and here is how I'm going to do it, you'll have missteps along the way, but that's all they're going to be, is missteps. It'll get you back on track, because at least you know that you have these goals and these milestones that you're going to be hitting. And if you don't, you're going to push to hit them the next quarter. But you're not just going to go out and assume, I'm really excuse me, I'm really busy, I worked 80 hours this week, that must mean we're doing good. It doesn't. It just means you worked 80 hours that week.
Right. Got it. And so ConnectStrat, who should be doing business with you, and why should they be doing business with you?
So we work exclusively with leadership teams of companies. And when I say leadership team, it sounds bigger than it may be, but we work with companies that are more than just the owner. There's usually someone that's involved in sales and marketing or finance, operations, or multiple people in operations. Could be 3 people, could be 8. And we're working with companies who are very, I will say they're more afraid of the status quo than they are growth and change. And so that's kind of our target audience. We call it a psychographic profile. I'd like to say there's a framework. I could very easily say that we work with customers, our average client may be $2 million and up, but that's not necessarily a barrier that we put there. We have companies that start smaller and work their way up. But you have to, absolutely, there's no shortcut to growing your business. It's putting the work in, and accepting that you don't know everything, and you're willing to make changes, and you're willing to get some of the stuff as owners off of your shoulders and let other people do some of that heavy lifting. So you can essentially clone yourself, because you can't do everything yourself. You really do need a group.
Got it. And so if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, what's the best way of getting a hold of you?
You could email me directly. It's Brett, BRETT, so 2 T's, at connectstrat.com. Or you could also just go to our website as well.
And the website is connectstrat.com.
Connectstrat.com. So think of Connect Strategy.
Got it. Makes sense. Well, thank you, Brett, for your time today and sharing such great wisdom and knowledge. Thank you again.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it.
And until next time on the Profits of IT, I am Jim Punzenberger, your host, and the creator of the Managed Prospecting System, looking to generate leads and appointments without cold calling or ad spend. Check out managedprospectingsystem.com.
Thank you for tuning in to the Profits of IT. Please smash that like button, subscribe, and share.